I wish I could tell you that it was a quiet discovery, that I found out gently, or that there was at least some grace to the moment. But there wasn't. It hit me hard, sudden and loud, like a door slamming shut behind me while I was still standing in the room. You see, there's a certain kind of betrayal that only comes from the people you've raised, the people you've fed, carried, worried over, and prayed for in the dark. That's what makes it cut so deep. It comes from inside your own blood. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't digging through drawers or reading things I wasn't supposed to. I walked into a conversation that wasn't meant for my ears, but sure as hell involved my name. I heard words like cremation, casket, viewing or no viewing, and then, clear as anything, Mom's not going to last that much longer anyway. They were sipping coffee, casually, like they were talking about a houseplant that needed replacing. I didn't say anything right away. I stood there for a moment too long trying to make sense of it. I even wondered if maybe I'd misheard, because sometimes your heart will beg your ears to lie to you, just so you can stay standing a little longer. But there it was. My own son and his wife, planning my funeral as if I were a piece of unfinished business they were ready to check off their list. You raise a child thinking you're building something unshakable. You teach them to walk, to talk, to navigate the world. You give up pieces of yourself, sleep, time, dreams, believing that, in the end, all that love will mean something. That it will be repaid not with gold or gifts, but with presence, with care, with a hand that doesn't let go when things get uncomfortable. What I got instead was silence when I walked in. That kind of thick, guilty silence you can feel in your teeth. And eyes that darted anywhere but mine. I wasn't dying. I wasn't sick. I was breathing just fine. But somehow to them I was already halfway in the ground, just waiting for them to pick out flowers. And do you want to know the worst part? It wasn't the funeral talk itself. It was how ordinary they made it sound. As if I had become an obligation. Task to be managed. Something to get over with. No trembling voices. No sadness. No hesitation. Just logistics. That's when I realized. They weren't mourning me, they were erasing me. They had moved past grief and landed in convenience. I had always told myself that family meant forever. That love, when done right, didn't expire. But standing there, listening to my own exit being planned before I'd even said goodbye, I felt a loneliness I wouldn't wish on anybody. It's one thing to feel alone in a crowd. It's another thing to feel invisible in front of the very people who carry your name. I walked away. Not in anger, though God knows it simmered beneath my ribs, but in heartbreak. Because in that moment I wasn't losing my life. I was losing my place in theirs. So I sat with it. I let it ache. I let the silence stretch. And when I finally decided to speak, it wasn't to beg or to bargain. It was to remind them that I was still here. Still breathing. Still capable of making my own choices. Still worthy of dignity. Because here's what I know now. Blood may tie you to people, but it doesn't guarantee that they'll keep showing up for you. Love is not automatic. Respect is not inherited. And the moment someone starts planning your end before you've even had your say, you owe it to yourself to speak louder than the coffin they tried to fit you in. So I gave them a silence of my own. Colder one. A deliberate one. The kind of silence that makes people remember your presence by the echo you leave behind. They wanted to bury something. I made sure they had something real to bury. Not a body, but the version of me they thought was too tired to matter. I'm not done. It wasn't the idea of death that rattled me. I've lived long enough to understand that our time here is on a ticking clock. I don't fear the end. I fear being pushed toward it before it's truly my time. I fear being talked about like I'm no longer in the room. And that's exactly what happened. My son and his wife weren't preparing for death. They were preparing for my absence. There's a difference. One comes from care. The other comes from convenience. I wasn't sick. I wasn't slipping away in some hospital bed, surrounded by machines. I was still cooking my own meals, still getting up before sunrise to feed the birds, still remembering every birthday in that family without needing a calendar. I was alive. Maybe older, sure. Little slower. But not done, not by a long shot. And yet, they had already decided I was no longer someone to include. just someone to manage. Like a file on a desk they were ready to close. I started to notice how the conversations changed after that. How I'd be in the room but not really part of it. How my opinions turned into background noise. I'd mention something about taking a trip or painting the back room, and they'd smile in that way people do when they don't think you'll follow through. Like I was telling bedtime stories. Fiction. They stopped asking what I wanted and started deciding what they thought I needed. That's the thing, they didn't treat me like I was dying. They treated me like I was already gone. And I'll tell you something that doesn't get said enough. Being treated like you're invisible when you're still breathing is a cruelty that wears a familiar face. It's not loud. Doesn't scream. It shows up in skipped phone calls, in conversations held over your head, in decisions made without your name ever being spoken. It's in the way people stop seeing your future and start managing your past. Kept wondering what changed. Was it my age? Was it a slip of the tongue I didn't catch? Was it just that they had built their lives so far from me, emotionally and physically, that I had turned into a loose end they were trying to tie up? And then it hit me. It wasn't about me at all. It was about them. Their fear. Their expectations. Their version of what aging is supposed to look like. And somewhere in their minds, I'd outlived my usefulness. They had reduced me to a timeline. But I am not a calendar. I am not a collection of doctor's appointments and just-in-case plans. I am still a whole person. I have thoughts that keep me up at night. I have favorite songs that make me cry. I still laugh so hard I snort sometimes. I am not a memory yet. You know, people think dying is about the last breath. But I think dying begins the moment the world stops listening to you. The moment your name is spoken in past tense while your heart is still beating. The moment your wishes become secondary to someone else's assumptions. That's the death that stings the most. The slow erasure of who you are by the people who claim to love you. And so I sat with that. I let the weight of their quiet rejection press against my chest. I didn't explode. I didn't confront. I observed. And what I saw was a picture I didn't belong in anymore. Not because I was gone, but because they had stopped making space for me. That's what hurt most. Not being told I was dying, but being told without words that I no longer mattered in their plans for the living. I want you to understand something clearly and without confusion. I am not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of disappearing while I'm still here. I'm afraid of watching my life shrink down to nothing more than a future obituary. I'm afraid of becoming something spoken about, instead of someone spoken to. Because once people decide you're done, they stop giving you space to surprise them. But let me tell you what they forgot. I am not someone you write off halfway through the story. I have chapters left. I have messes left to make. I have beauty to witness. I have forgiveness to give and maybe a little vengeance too, in my own quiet way. I am not someone who will be buried before I'm ready. I'm still the author of this life. And I refuse to let anyone write my ending without my pen. I was never dying. I was just being dismissed. There's a strange thing that happens when people stop seeing you as fully alive. They start speaking for you, over you, around you, but rarely to you. And they call it help. They say it's about taking care of things, being prepared, easing the burden. But what they don't say, what they don't realize maybe, is that in their rush to manage what comes after me, they're stealing what's still mine to live. I'm not against planning. I've lived long enough to know that life gets messy if you don't leave a little order behind. I've got a drawer full of labeled folders. I've got notes scribbled about who should get the china. And yes, I even have some thoughts on what music I'd want playing when it's my time to go. But that's the thing. Asterisk when it's my time star. My voice. My choice. Not something whispered over coffee in the other room while I'm still folding laundry. There is something deeply wrong with treating the living like they're already gone. And I'm not just talking about funerals. I'm talking about the tone people use when they talk to you like you're fragile glass. The way decisions are made on your behalf like you're incapable. The way your needs get translated through someone else's comfort. As if just because you've crossed a certain age, you've somehow surrendered your seat at the table. I didn't raise my hand and say, I'm ready to be erased. I didn't tap out. I still walk into a room expecting to be seen, not summarized. And yet, that's what was happening. Not just with my son and his wife, but in quiet, casual ways all around me. The doctor who started addressing them instead of me. The neighbor who offered help before I'd even said I needed any. The cashier who called me sweetie like I was a child. These may seem like small things, but I'm telling you they stack up. They build a wall between who you are and how others see you. And before you know it, you're watching your own life play out like it belongs to someone else. Let me say this as plainly as I can. The living deserve respect, not obituaries. Don't talk about me like I'm already gone. Don't decide what I should want based on what makes you more comfortable. Don't strip away my agency under the disguise of love. Because true love listens, asks, waits. Respect isn't just about manners, it's about space. The space to speak, to be messy, to have opinions that might not make sense to you. It's about honoring the whole person, not just the parts that fit into your narrative. And when someone is still alive, still thinking and feeling and dreaming, they deserve that space. Even if it's inconvenient. Even if it challenges your assumptions. What broke me really was not just that they were planning my funeral, it was that they never thought to ask me what I wanted. They spoke like I wasn't capable. Like the weight of the conversation was too much for my fragile ears. But what they didn't understand is that I've lived through more grief than they've even imagined. I've buried parents. I've stood at graves with my knees trembling and still found the strength to keep going. You don't make it this far in life by being fragile. You make it by being damn near indestructible. They thought they were sparing me, but they were only silencing me. And that, more than anything, is what I couldn't forgive. Not right away. Because dignity is not a luxury. It's not a gift you hand down like inheritance. It's a right. And when you take it from someone while they're still breathing, you steal the one thing they've spent their whole life trying to protect. Their sense of self. If they had asked, I would have told them what I wanted. I would have laughed with them about the songs I'd want played. I would have even given them the name of the bakery that makes the kind of lemon tart I'd want served after the service. But they didn't ask. They just planned. And that tells me that somewhere along the line, I stopped being real to them. Became a task. Checklist. A future burden to lift. So now I walk into every room like I belong there. 'Cause I do. I speak up even when they look past me. I remind them that I'm not done. Not with my words, not with my choices, not with my life. And I do it not just for myself, but for every person who's ever felt the slow, quiet ache of being pushed aside while still standing. You don't need to plan my end. You just need to respect that I'm still here. I spent a long time thinking about how to respond. After hearing them talk about my funeral like it was some sort of home renovation project they needed to finish before the weekend, I didn't storm out. I didn't cry in front of them. I just stood there, breathing quietly, wondering when I had become a task instead of a mother. And once the shock settled into my bones, I started asking myself one question over and over. What do you do when the people you love try to bury you while you're still alive? Well, I figured if they wanted something to bury, I'd give them something. Not my body. Not my silence. Not my obedience. But something they wouldn't forget. I think people assume that getting older means you're done making bold moves. That after a certain point, you just sit still and let the world rearrange itself around you. But that's never been me. I raised children, survived loss, built a life from less than nothing. I know how to shake things up. I know how to make people listen when they've stopped hearing you. So I started with the one thing they didn't expect me to touch. The will. They thought I wouldn't notice that they'd been making plans without me. They thought I wouldn't change anything because they assumed I was too tired or too dependent. But tired is not the same as powerless. And dependence is not the same as surrender. So I met with a lawyer. I sat across from a man who had probably seen it all, and I said, let's talk about what happens after I go, but on my terms. I made sure that everything I had, every cent, every possession, every family photo with the corners worn soft from years of touch, went to people who had seen me. Who had called just to hear my voice. Who had come by not to check in but to sit down and be with me. And I made sure to leave a letter sealed just for my son. Now don't get me wrong. This wasn't about revenge. I didn't want to punish him. But I did want him to feel it. Not the sting of money lost or some legal slight, but the weight of realizing he had made room for my death before he made space for my life. I wanted him to sit with that, to read every word I wrote and feel the distance he created by trying to manage my ending instead of honoring my presence. You see, the gift I gave wasn't just paperwork or property. It was truth. I gave him something to bury, all right, but it was the idea of who he thought I had become. Weak, quiet, ready to go. I buried that version of me so deep he'll never find it again. Because it never existed. It was his invention, his convenience. And in doing that, I gave myself something too. I gave myself permission. Permission to stop waiting for validation from people who had already decided to stop seeing me. Permission to live these years not just as someone waiting to die, but as someone choosing every single day to be fully here. I started taking walks without telling anyone where I was going. I went to the movies alone, bought popcorn and laughed too loud. I even joined a book club where no one knew my history. Just my opinions. Felt good. Like coming back to myself after a long time underground. I'm not saying it didn't hurt. Of course it did. Love always leaves bruises when it goes quiet. But I've learned that grief doesn't only show up when people die. Sometimes you grieve the living. Sometimes you mourn what you thought you meant to someone. And when that moment comes, you have a choice. You can curl into it and disappear, or you can use it to start over. I chose to start over. If they wanted to write me out of the picture, I'd paint a new one. One where I am not a shadow in the background. One where I am the center of my own story again. Not out of pride but out of truth. 'Cause I deserve that. We all do. They were ready to bury me. So I gave them something to bury. I handed them the version of myself they thought they were dealing with. And I walked away as someone they never saw coming. I think what stunned me most wasn't that they had the nerve to plan my funeral while I was still upright. It was how quietly they expected me to take it. Like I was supposed to nod, smile, and slip away without making a sound. Like my silence was a favor they deserved. But I've never been the silent type. And if they thought I was just going to lay down and let myself be buried under their assumptions, they don't know me at all. See, when someone tries to silence you before you're gone, they aren't just robbing you of your voice. They're robbing you of your place. In the conversation. In the family. In your own life. And after I sat with the hurt and let the disbelief run its course, I realized I had two options. I could fade away like they were clearly hoping I would, or I could open my mouth and remind them exactly who they were dealing with. So I spoke up. Not with shouting or accusations. I'm too old to waste energy throwing words at brick walls. I spoke with clarity, with calm, and with enough strength to rattle every expectation they had about me. I told them that planning someone's funeral without their knowledge is not a kindness, it's a violation. That deciding I was near the end without asking me how I felt was not loving, it was lazy. I looked them straight in the eye and said, if you wanted silence, you underestimated my lungs. Because here's the truth. When people try to push you into the background, it's not because you don't matter. It's because your presence makes them uncomfortable. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's the complicated weight of watching the person who raised you age into someone you don't know how to care for. Get it. But uncomfortable or not, I'm still here. And I still have things to say. What they didn't understand is that having a voice isn't just about talking. It's about claiming. Claiming your place in the room. Claiming your story. Claiming your right to be consulted, not managed. I have lived decades in this world. I've had moments of great joy and staggering sorrow. I've learned how to love without asking for anything in return, and how to stand up after the kind of heartbreak that leaves people stuck for years. I didn't come this far to be spoken over. When they talked about me like I wasn't in the room, what they forgot was that I had been in rooms like that before, and I'd made people listen. I've made my case in front of doctors who called me dear, while waving off my symptoms. I've had to raise my voice in banks, in schools, in family dinners where no one thought I understood the conversation. I know how to make myself heard. And once I start talking, I don't stop until every single word has landed where it needs to. So that's what I did. I made them sit down. I told them how it felt to hear my life reduced to logistics. How it felt to be treated like an afterthought in a story I created. I told them that I didn't raise a child to inherit my home. I raised a child to remember my spirit. And if they couldn't carry that with them, they had no business making decisions about how I should be honored. I didn't do it to shame them. I did it to reclaim my place. Because there is power in being unsilenced. There is power in naming your worth out loud, especially to those who have forgotten it. And there's something sacred about reminding people that you're not just their parent or their elder. You're a person. A full, breathing, thinking, feeling person who still deserves to be asked, listened to, respected. I know I made them uncomfortable. I could see it in the way they looked down, shifted in their seats, didn't know what to say. But sometimes discomfort is the only doorway to understanding. And I hope, that somewhere underneath the awkwardness they heard me. Because I won't be quiet just to make other people feel better. I won't sit still while people plan around me like I'm already a ghost. I won't pretend that their actions didn't bruise me just because it's easier than speaking the truth. If they expected me to go gently, they picked the wrong woman. After everything, after the betrayal, the silence, the quiet war waged behind my back, I found myself asking a question that stuck to my ribs like something heavy you can't shake. What now? What do you do when you've stood your ground, spoken your truth, and still feel the ache of being misjudged by the people you love most? You find peace. But not the kind people talk about in greeting cards. Not the kind that floats in after a good cry and a long nap. I mean the kind of peace you build, stone by stone, choice by choice, with your own hands. The kind you earn when you stop waiting for others to see you clearly and decide instead to be fully visible to yourself. That was the moment I stopped measuring my worth by their understanding. I stopped hoping for an apology that may never come. I stopped hoping for a sudden change of heart that would make it all easier to swallow. Instead, I opened my windows. I played the music I liked a little too loud. I made the house smell like garlic and sage again, not hospital-grade lemon wipes. I stopped shrinking in the presence of their disappointment. Because I finally understood that I didn't need their approval to live a full life. I didn't need to be understood to be valid. And I sure as hell didn't need to be softened, edited, or tiptoed around. I am not a fragile heirloom collecting dust on a shelf. I am still a roaring thing. There's a beautiful kind of defiance in choosing to live loudly after someone has tried to quiet you. I started doing things I hadn't done in years. Not because I had something to prove, but because I had something to reclaim. Myself. My rhythm. My laughter, which had gone a little quiet for a while. I went out dancing with a group of women who wore bright lipstick and didn't apologize for their knees aching the next day. I reread my favorite books, the ones with creases in the spine from all the times they saved me. I lit candles for no reason. I started buying fresh flowers again, not because anyone would see them but because I would. That's the thing. When they stopped seeing me, I realized I had stopped seeing parts of myself too. I had started living smaller, gentler. I had started anticipating their discomfort and folding myself accordingly. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. And once I found my voice again, I promised myself, never again. That kind of peace is quiet, but not weak. It's the peace that comes from choosing yourself without waiting for permission. It's the kind that lets you walk through the same house with the same memories, but finally feel like the one holding the pen again. And eventually the world catches up. Slowly people notice the shift. The way you move through rooms like you belong there, which you always did. They notice the light in your eyes they hadn't seen in a while. They may not say it out loud, but they see it. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes the greatest justice is simply refusing to disappear. I won't pretend everything's perfect now. There's still tension. There are still phone calls with too much silence between words. But I don't fill that silence anymore. I let it stand. I let them sit in it, let them feel what I felt for far too long. The weight of being misunderstood. But I don't carry that weight alone anymore. I've placed it down gently, like a stone on the side of the road, and walked away from it. 'Cause I have a life to live. Real one. Not the version they imagined when they tried to wrap it up before I was ready. I still wake up early. I still talk to the birds like they're old friends. I still have plans. Small ones, big ones, the kind I don't need to explain to anyone. And when the time comes, as it does for all of us, I'll face it not as someone who was managed or silenced or pitted, but as someone who lived on her own terms until the very end. Let them bury the version of me they made up. I've got no use for it.